our wonderful Trish introduce our speaker.
Great, Nancy, and of course, Pat, Squire, thank you so much, you guys, for being part of the team that's getting this series on anti-racism together. It's a huge topic, and we're about to embark on a very fascinating aspect of it. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Evangeline or Eve Nañez. But at the end of that, I'm going to ask her a question. So kind of unusual, but I know she's just, what she can ask? No.
Trish, just one thing. Can you just speak up just a tad?
Yes. I can.
Thank you.
Speak up more than a tad. Eva's a current student at Reed College. She works as the Indigenous Diaspora Events Coordinator in the Multicultural Resource Center at Reed. She's an enrolled member of the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico, grew up on her reservation as well as in the city of Albuquerque. Growing up surrounded by her culture and its values has instilled in her the drive to make a space for Indigenous students at Reed, a place where there was never any intention to do so. Eve enjoys creating events for students of color with other event coordinators at the MRC, the Multicultural Resource Center, and working to create an environment that cares for and genuinely supports students of color. So as you can see, she has a fascinating background and is really doing what she needs and feels impelled to do. My question is, often when I'm doing meetings or Zoom meetings, whatever, I'm dealing with people from the Portland metro area. So I commonly do a Indigenous thanks for the land that we now occupy that relates to Portland area, but I don't really have anything that's a generic, for Oregon. But I do want to begin this with a sincere thanks for our being able to be here on this land that we now call Oregon. So Eve, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trish. Thank you everyone for coming here. I've never done an event of this size. So this is really wonderful seeing all of y'all's really beautiful faces. I see that the Zoom has 4 pages of people, so that is really awesome. And going off of your question, Trish, I think when we do land acknowledgements, that it's important to first, before even like getting into like saying thanks and stuff like that, acknowledging that we're all unwelcome guests here on this land, because there was never any permission that was asked for the Native peoples here in Oregon, and this land was taken without their consent. So, we are sitting in that space and we're unwelcome. And so just being mindful of that, the space we take up and, who is here is still here. It's because it's not like Native people, just went and walked away, they're still here living, so just being mindful of that, and then being grateful, for being here and having this opportunity to learn. I think that is the best, land acknowledgement that can take place. So I guess I'll get into it now. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right, can everybody see it? Sweet. Okay. Let's move my thingy. Okay, can everyone see that? All right. Okay, so without further ado, we'll get into it. Hello, everyone. My name is Evangeline Nañez. Thank you for being here with me today. Today I'm going to be talking about the history of Thanksgiving and why it's a problematic holiday. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself before I get into it. My name is Evangeline Nañez. That is my government name. My given name from my community back home is Zawimai, and my clan is Big Yellow Corn Clan. Any pronouns are fine. I'm a gay, Native American and Mexican woman, Taurus son, Reed College sociology student, music minor, group facilitator, Indigenous diaspora events coordinator, harm reduction coordinator, garden grower and thief, racial equity student and teacher, peer mentor, and passionate community caretaker. So these are some important aspects of myself that I think are important for me to share and speak to who I am as a person. So I have this slide where I want to get to know everyone, but I realize now how big our group is, and so just for the sake of time, I don't think we'll be able to hear from everyone. But I will say that I would love for everyone to just type in the chat their answers to these questions, and even though I won't get to read all of them, I still want to be able to look at that after I'm done. So I can see who the audience is, who I'm talking to, and just gauging that. So if you all could type into the chat your name, your pronouns, if you feel comfortable with that, your race or ethnicity, and why you're here. And these questions are important to me because they gauge who my audience is, especially race. To me, that helps me center who I'm directly speaking to about these issues, because that can really change the dynamic of the talk, and also centers who I need to protect. For instance, if there's any Black and Native folks in this, that helps me, get aware of, being mindful of that. And I want to know a little bit of why you're here. What spurred you to have this, come to this talk with me. So yeah, so if everyone could just we'll take a couple minutes. I'm fine with that. And so everyone just type that in the chat. And I'll see if I can look too, so. Okay, so everyone can just still keep typing those in the chat. Feel free to keep doing that, and I'll just continue on. But I will be reading them after this, just because I want to know. Thank you for that too. I really appreciate anyone sending that in. So here are some goals that I have for this presentation today. The first is to understand your position in this history, how it relates to you, and your positionality in this entire context of not only a story, but also a presence here in America. Two, to understand how harm is perpetrated through the story, working through what has been told to us and what is actually the truth, and then understanding how the truth that the story we've been told is harmful. Three, understand how monuments that honor colonizers continue to cause harm. Through this presentation, I want us to be able to understand how Thanksgiving works as a monument, and how this is harmful. Four, understand whose job it is to right the past and ongoing wrongs. I hope that in this presentation, we all can begin to understand who the labor is put on. And then five, to learn how to better listen to Black and Indigenous voices. Even though my talk is really centering around Indigenous people here in America, I will be touching on some similarities between the experiences of Black and Native folks. And I think those similarities, I deemed that important to include this as part of the goals, because that is really important. These are some community foundations that I have for us. These foundations allow us to have a really productive conversation and allow it, make sure that the knowledge that we learn here in this space, doesn't just stay in the space that it leaves, and that we can put that forward in our everyday lives. So be mindful of the space you take up and make space for others. We're doing the best we can. We are learners and sharers. Be mindful of what is shared in this space. Apply the work outside of this space and respect people's lived experiences. Conflict and discomfort are part of growth. Self-work, self-healing, and self-love are necessary. Acknowledge and appreciate progress, and communities are built through trust and commitment. So these are some things that I want us to keep in mind when going through this presentation. So we just have a healthy, dialogue and conversation. I have a content warning because this presentation talks a lot about colonization, racism, and murder that can be potentially triggering to folks of color, especially Black and Native folks. Yeah, like I was saying, this presentation includes discussions about colonization, racism, and murder that can be potentially triggering to folks of color, especially Black and Native folks. And it's extremely, this content is really heavy. So if you need to take a break, turn your camera off, please feel free to do so. Just do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And now I'm going to get into a little bit about where I'm from. So I'm from Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico. I live here with my family on top of this 367-foot mesa. The photo on your right is a photo of the seal of our different clans. And I'm Big Yellow Corn Clan, which you can see right here with my little cursor. Here we live without any running water, plumbing, or electricity. These are choices that we have made for ourselves. They do not make us primitive in any way. Our language here is Keres, which you heard me introduce myself in the very beginning. That's the traditional way in which we introduce ourselves. And this is where I grew up. I was really immersed in my culture here. I was surrounded by my relatives, and through their teachings that have been passed on to me, those have instilled the values that I have today. And I wanted to include some photos of old Acoma, so you can see how really not much has changed landscape-wise, because I have some photos later on in the presentation of today, what Acoma looks like today. So the photo on your left is a photo of some Acoma women with their pottery standing in front of the mission church on top of the mesa. The mission church was constructed under Spanish colonial rule. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And the photo on your right is a photo of some Acoma women walking down one of the traditional stairways that lead up to the mesa. Before the road was built, the main access points were through these traditional walkways. Yeah, and I'll show you a picture later on showing the road that was built. Because before the road was there was just these access, these walkways and a big sand dune that led all the way up the side of the mesa. The photo on your left is a photo of a row of houses on top of the mesa. The traditional Acoma house consists of 2 to 3 stories with the access points through these big wooden ladders that lead up to the different doorways. And I really like this photo a lot because in the background you can see Enchanted Mesa. And Enchanted Mesa is really important to our story as Acoma people. It's said to be the first place that we chose to reside at in our journey down from Chocolate Canyon and Mesa Verde. So my people resided here at Enchanted Mesa until one day everyone was down in the valley below, and a big bolt of lightning struck the main stairway that led up, and destroyed any way to get back up to the mesa. So we took this as a sign that we weren't meant to reside on this mesa, and we journeyed a little farther to the mesa that we're currently at today, which is where we've been ever since. So Enchanted Mesa is extremely spiritual to us and respected, and no one is allowed to go up there as to not disturb the spirits that reside there. I'm sorry, wait, can you guys hear any background noise? I just want to make sure because it's loud outside. Okay, great, thank you. So the photo on your right is a photo of an Acoma eagle dancer. This is just one of the many different traditional garments that we wear. Yeah, this one is for the eagle dance. And this slide brings us to the first question that I want us to talk about. So the photo on your left is a photo of a young Acoma girl smiling on Acoma Reservation. And when I saw this photo, it immediately reminded me of how important land is to Native people. Land is something that's much more than just the physical space we inhabit. It's something that's tied to us spiritually and emotionally. It affects our well-being, our mental health, and it just, it's really, I just want to emphasize that it's really more than just physical space. It has a lot more to do with that. And it helps us orient ourselves to our history there and our ancestors. And I wanted to relate this photo to a photo of some Pueblo children at Carlisle boarding school, Indian boarding school in Pennsylvania. And seeing the differences in these two photos, the children's demeanor, their facial expressions, because in taking Indian children away from their ancestral homelands, it really messes up their well-being, their mental health, and their orientation. So Dr. Greg Cajete states that orientation is more than physical context and placement. In its deeper meanings, it is about mindset, ways of thinking and knowing, origins of communication, and a sense of direction. It is about how the human spirit understands itself. And so you can imagine how taking Indian children away from their homeland really messes up their orientation, the ways in which they orient themselves to the land, to their ancestors. So I just have a question. If anyone, has any knowledge of Indian boarding schools, please feel free to share. I would love to hear what, the common knowledge is.
Go ahead and raise your virtual hand if you want to share, and we'll call on you. Okay, Elena, go ahead and unmute yourself.
One thing that I guess I knew, but was reinforced recently in study, was that the Catholics got money from the U.S. government, who was responsible for Indian education. And so they got money to run the schools, but they also charged a huge tuition. So they had first dibs on any allotments that were supposed to go from the government to tribal members. They would instead go to the church for running the schools. And it was really expensive. And it was involuntary, and the students were just basically ripped away from their families. And they weren't allowed to speak their native languages. And the whole idea was just to make the Indian culture disappear.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
We have a Judy Newton. Go ahead and unmute.
Yes, hi. Probably about 15 years ago, my family was in Phoenix on a trip, and there's a museum there. I don't remember the name of it, but it had a large display, a lot of education about the boarding schools, and my two daughters were with us, and they were quite young, and we were all just shocked. I don't really remember how much I knew before going there. So it just got across a lot about what happened at the boarding schools, more than I had ever known. And it was good to have my daughters introduced to some knowledge about it. That's all.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. No, exactly. Yeah. I think, this history isn't like widely shared, and that's intentional. Indian children were ripped away from their families. My grandmother personally can remember her mother hiding her because officials would come through and round up Indian children. So I think that really explains how this isn't that long ago and is still happening today. Here in Oregon, we have Chemawa Indian boarding school, which was one of the original boarding schools as well. And it's, in this taking of Indian children from their homes, the trauma that goes through, these children that happens presents itself in historical trauma in the body that's passed down from generation to generation. And it presents itself in different ways in depression and other illnesses. So I think it really goes to show how important land is and the connection to land.
So Eve, we've got a number of people with their hands up. Do you want to continue the conversation or move on?
We can take one more.
Okay, and Coco, you were the next. You need to unmute yourself. I don't know where she went. Geez, I hope I didn't tell her to go away. Next, we had Rita. You need
Hello?
to unmute yourself. Hi.
Yeah, I did. Hi. Yes, I actually live in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I've lived there for 40 years. I knew nothing about the boarding schools until we moved there. Our Historical Society Museum in Carlisle has a very large display and dialogue about the boarding school in Carlisle. They called it the Indian School, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad commentary, but I think they did a very good job of explaining it. The actual land now is the U.S. Army War College. Probably Eve knows that.
Thank you, Rita. Yeah, I'd actually read, that it was the War College now, which I think is
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of horrible things have happened at Indian boarding schools. And, one more thing touching about land, how it affects a lot of these children never made it back home because it just was so detrimental being away. And like you can imagine being deprived of anything of your culture, what that does to these children.
So I just want to make the comment for those of you that didn't get to share, including Coco, I'm sorry I didn't get you. Go ahead and put your comments in the chat like Trish has here. So we don't want to lose your comments, but we want to move on with our program.
Yeah, I'm sorry that everyone doesn't have time to share. I know this is a really big group, which I'm super excited about. But yeah, if you can do the chat function, that would be great too, because I would love to read all of these after. So here are some photos of what Acoma looks like today. As you can see, not much has changed landscape-wise. So the photo on your left is a photo of a kiva ladder leading up into a kiva. A kiva is a place of worship for our traditional faith. The photo on the top in the middle is a photo of the road that leads up to Acoma. And in place of that before was a huge sand dune. The photo on your right, the top right, is a photo of a watering hole on top of Acoma. The watering holes are used to be the traditional ways in which we would get our water. It would collect rainfall When the Spanish came, they allowed their cattle and other their horses to urinate and defecate in these pools. And the bacteria that's grown in there has made the water undrinkable, unfortunately. But we do have a spring down in the valley called Gumi, and that is our main water access point. And the photo on the bottom is a photo of my house down in the valley. I really love this photo because it reminds me about the land as well, how well you can see the stars. And when I look at the sky out there, I really feel connected to my family and my ancestors. I feel like I can see and feel all of that there, versus in the city where I look at the sky and I can't see any of that. I think that ties into orientation. And, you know, you can think about how that was probably felt a lot for Indian children who were, you know, taken away, and, you know, Indian children today who are growing up without being able to live on their ancestral lands. So this is the mission church on top of Acoma. It was built under the Spanish colonial rule, like I said. So my people were forced to drag these huge timbers from Mount Taylor, which is some miles away, and construct this huge church. In the process, a lot of Acoma folks died, unfortunately, and their bodies are said to be buried in the walls of this place, which I think is one of the reasons why that it's still standing today, as to not disturb, you know, those spirits in there and be respectful, even though it was, you know, built under such an ugly premise. So I want to get into a little with the Acoma interaction with the Spanish now. So in 1599, the Spanish invaded New Mexico. Juan de Oñate was given permission from Spain to colonize New Mexico and therefore take all the land away from the Pueblo peoples residing there. So he sent his nephew, Juan de Zalvadar, to go to Acoma and proclaim, you know, this proclamation. And so when he arrived, of course, he was met with hostility because he started demanding different goods and saying that this land was now his. So a fight ensued, and in this process, he and his men were killed. So upon hearing this, Oñate was enraged, and he and his army went to Acoma to teach my people a lesson. And this was known as the Acoma Massacre. In this process, 800 of my people were killed. Entire clans were wiped out. So the photo that you saw in the beginning with the different clans is not at all representative of the true number, you know, that existed over time through genocide. And this one contact, entire clans were wiped out. So you can see how detrimental that is to, you know, this contact is to Native communities. In addition, the women and children were taken by Spanish priests, either to be sent to different missions in Mexico or Spain, or they were sold into slavery. The men were ordered to have their right foot cut off, as, you know, just a symbol of how strong the Spanish are, their rule, basically. So this is just, you know, one of the harmful things that has happened to my community. Unfortunately, interactions like this, you know, weren't uncommon. This same fate was suffered by a lot of different pueblos in New Mexico. And today, there are numerous amounts of statues honoring Oñate and his men all over New Mexico. So through this, you can see how these monuments further perpetuate their harm because they stand as a glorification of the acts of wrong that they did. They don't in any way serve as historical markers or, you know, lessons or teaching. They just stand as an acceptance of colonization and as acceptance of stolen land. It doesn't highlight their wrong. It only provides space for them. So in this same way, the story of Thanksgiving works similarly, even though it isn't a metal monument like this one here. The repetition and the solidification of the lie works as a monument, and this continues to harm. Now we can get into, the history of Thanksgiving. And again, knowing the size of our group, I guess we can just type this into the chat too. So the question that I would like everyone to answer is, what is your understanding of Thanksgiving? What does it mean to you and your family? So if you all could just take some time to type that into the chat, I would love to, hear about this and read about it. And with your answers, just kind of keep those in mind. I want these answers, to be just what is fresh off your brain, not, what you know now, because I feel like that can be kind of common knowledge now. But just, immediately, what is your impression of Thanksgiving, and, what does it mean to you and your family? How do you celebrate it? So we'll, just keep typing and all that. And while, everyone is typing, I'll continue on just for the sake of time. So Thanksgiving is one of the biggest repaintings of Native American and colonizer interactions. It's revisionist history. While everyone is typing, does anyone want to raise their hand? And we can just pick one person to answer. What do we mean by revisionist history? So if anyone feels comfortable answering that, please raise your hand, and I'd love to hear. That's okay too, if no one has anything to share.
Margot, you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, this painting is a figment of somebody's imagination. What it doesn't explain that when the Puritans came over and when the Europeans came over, that the biggest present they ever gave to the native people were diseases that killed them, and I've been reading about the Puritans and how they got through the first winter, and it was later the tribes helped them, taught them how to plant corn, and but they still fought with the tribes and had disagreements, and then they had to work out agreements with the native people to be able to stay on the land that they were, because the Puritans and the Europeans coming in thinking, well, that the land is really not inhabited, it's ours to take. And this picture here of a Native American taking some food, pretending that the Native Americans had a great feast with the Puritans to celebrate their harvest, is made up. It's not true. They really were the Puritans eating by themselves. And anyway, it was a very difficult time for both the Native Americans and for the Puritans, who came here for what they believe was religious freedom.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing, Margot. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's a revised history that's been, it spreads misinformation. It's a lie. It's been revised in a way that tells it the way in which white people want to hear it, the ways in which they want to remember it. So, with this story, a similar example is how slavery is taught in American schools. I think it's really interesting when you go through children's textbooks teaching about this. It's pretty common to find sentences saying workers from Africa came, and built this great nation, when we all know that's not true. These people were kidnapped and taken from their homes and forced into to do this labor. So it's these tellings that it's these, the ways in which it's written. It allows white people to feel comfortable about their colonial presence here in America, and it's meant to highlight positive interactions. the history of Thanksgiving just really kind of erases the presence of Native people in America because, you know, the whole story being like there was this meal that was had, and then it only centers on the colonists after that. The Native people just kind of go away unless there's some conflict. And this erasure is really harmful and detrimental to Indigenous folks because the lack of representation and misrepresentation further just creates a lot of internal conflict and harm. So, you know, here we can see some stuff that is traditionally seen. I'm sure everyone has seen, you know, or participated in a Thanksgiving play, you know, dressing up as pilgrims and Indians and, you know, having this meal. Another thing is the way in which it's been commodified. Excuse me. Thanksgiving through different movies like Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. You know, here we see Snoopy with the colonist hat and Woodchuck with the Indian headdress, and the ways in which this, you know, Thanksgiving has been taught and been presented to, you know, children in this really soft, tangible way that softens, you know, the actual truth and further spreads this misinformation. And, you know, Thanksgiving just is an excuse for all of us to get together and eat a lot of food. When in reality, we should be thankful throughout the year, regardless of just this holiday. And, you know, we should share meals if you're close with your family, regardless of just that holiday. So I have a little video for us to watch. It's not that long. And in watching this, after watching it, I want us to think about how your privilege and your personal experiences tie into your answers of what Thanksgiving means to you. So comparing that to the responses of these folks, they're being asked what Thanksgiving makes them think of or means to them.
Thanksgiving. Lies.
Sadness, total sadness. Thanksgiving is a time when my family gets together and tells stories about our creation myths and who we were and who we are and really what we lost.
Inaccurate. I like the overall idea of Thanksgiving, but not where it actually comes from.
Turkey and white pilgrims. I don't know what the first Thanksgiving was, but I highly doubt it was a group of happy pilgrims and a group of happy Indians cooking turkey together.
Family.
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 Watch football, overeat.
Warm.
A celebration.
Thankful.
I don't really celebrate the holiday for like what it actually is, more of like just getting to have family over and eat. Colonization. I think it is important to give thanks and to have a day for that, but maybe the history of why we celebrated it in that certain way is more complicated.
Oh, that's a horror. Horror beyond measure. Terrible, brutal, atrocity, massacre.
There was a massacre. Puritans came and slaughtered them. They didn't want to eat with the savage. They slaughtered millions of us. I don't know why they call themselves Puritans.
Romanticized. I would definitely say the story of Thanksgiving and coming together is definitely romanticized because of the horrible atrocities that were committed against us.
Thanksgiving to me means a day for football and lots of good eating and trying not to think about what it really represents.
So seeing those responses, you know, we can do some internal thinking and compare that to personal experiences and privilege and how that ties into your answers and how that compares to the answers that these folks gave. So before really getting into the time period of Thanksgiving, we kind of have to understand, we do have to understand the history in the time period before. And I guess for, again, time's sake, if anyone has any knowledge of European contact in North America, feel free to type that in the chat. I'd love to, read that. But we'll get into it now. So there was English contact prior to the Plymouth colonists. There had been routine trading expeditions from Europeans with indigenous people of North America. So Europeans were coming over and trading different goods with native peoples living along the East Coast. But in addition to this, there were also routine kidnappings. So Europeans were coming over and kidnapping native people from the coast and selling them into slavery. This is exactly what happened in 1614 when a man named Captain Thomas Hunt docked near the Wampanoag community of Patuxet along the coast. Hunt came under the guise of a trader, a European trader, but when he got there, his intention was much different. So he invited the native people living along the coast to come onto his boat and look at some of the goods that he had to trade with them, but he double-crossed them. And in doing so, he shut 27 Wampanoag native people below the decks of his boat and sailed back to Spain to sell them into slavery. And one of these stolen peoples was named Tisquantum, or more commonly known as Squanto. I'm sure if anyone has seen any Thanksgiving play or movie, I'm sure everyone is aware of the friendly Indian Squanto and how he taught the colonists to plant corn and all those other things. So knowing Tisquantum's history is really important in understanding his interactions with the colonists later on. So eventually Tisquantum, when Tisquantum got to Spain, he was sent to London to work for a man named Sir John Slaney. And Slaney connected Tisquantum with a man named Captain Thomas Dermer. And Dermer had previously been an associate of Hunt's and was had worked with him before. And Dermer got connected with Tisquantum and invited him to sail back to Patuxet with him in 1619. So Tisquantum and Dermer sailed back to Patuxet, and when they arrived back, Tisquantum realized that everyone in his community had died from disease. So throughout the years of European contact, Europeans had brought over disease, and this disease was extremely fatal to Native folks because we possess no immunity whatsoever. In some cases, the fatality rates were between 50 and 90%. So this contact was extremely dangerous. So you can imagine what that must have felt like for Tisquantum, realizing that everyone in his community has died. What that looks like and what that does, can't even imagine that pain. So Dermer dropped Tisquantum off at Patuxet and sailed on farther down the coast with the intention of docking at a place called Martha's Vineyard. And from there, he wanted to trade with some native folks there. So Dermer arrived, and when he arrived, he was met by the Wampanoag native named Epinow. And Epinow spoke English. And, this sparked inquiry in Dermer because he was wondering how he could have learned English. And that's when Epinow revealed to him that he had been one of the people that his associate Hunt had stolen and sold into slavery. And that's how he learned English, which is also, the way in which Tisquantum learned English. I think, whenever we see those movies, Thanksgiving movies, the fact that Squanto, was able to communicate with the colonists, no one ever really questions why he knew English, or it's some, soft story like he had been to England under his own, under his own will. That wasn't the case. So that's another rewritten thing. So Dermer was a little alarmed and didn't want to, have any retaliation from Epinow. But Epinow kind of played along and said that that experience didn't affect him, and he, harbored no hate against that. when in reality he was getting ready to lead Dermer and his crew into an ambush party. So Epinow invited Dermer and his crew farther inland, and as they ventured further inland, they were greeted by the ambush party. And his crew was killed, and Dermer was wounded. So Dermer made his way back to his ship and attempted to sail down to Virginia for medical treatment, but ultimately died from his injuries. So it's these hostile reactions that stem directly from the negative interactions with the Europeans. So this consistent, bringing of disease and kidnappings of Native people, of course, created these, hostile reactions and, this malice that was harbored because there was this fear, and this fear, translated into, wanting to protect communities. And so in doing so, of course, hostility was present. So now we can, get into the time period of Thanksgiving. And my task for all of you is I want you to actively be thinking about your perception and experience of Thanksgiving, and how this interacts with the presented truth, what actually happened. So just keeping that in mind is important. So what actually went down was, eventually Tisquantum made his way further inland with the rest of the Wampanoag community. And later on in the years, he introduced the chief of the Wampanoags, named Chief Massasoit, to the colonists after Tisquantum had discovered them starving off the coast. And Massasoit saw a really critical chance to make a relationship with the colonists, one in which that would protect the welfare of the tribe and kind of keep the colonists at bay. So Massasoit negotiated a treaty in which land would be exchanged for guns and ammunition for protection, not only from the intertribal conflict that was happening with the Narragansett, but also with the colonists themselves. So Massasoit, did this with the welfare of his tribe in mind. And this is where the myth that the land was willingly given up and handed over to the colonists emerges. And this is a lie. This was a forced decision because having, these colonists in their territory presented a problem. And Massasoit needed to come up with a solution that was in the means that he had available. So the real Thanksgiving was this land deal. So Thanksgiving was actually a land agreement for protection. It was a treaty that was signed. And like I said before, the Wampanoag, had a problem that they needed to deal with. And the problem was these white people that showed up and started, trying to build on their land. So this treaty ensured that relations would be peaceful, and it protected the tribe from any negative interactions with the colonists. The intent was to have the colonists be kind of kept at bay and, satiate their land hungry drive. And this, would ensure the livelihood of the tribe. But like most treaties between Native folks and white people, it didn't last. Eventually, the colonists began to intrude further inland to Wampanoag territory without any consent, and tensions began to arise. And eventually, Massasoit died, and the alliance broke. So I have a question. If anyone wants to, raise their hand and answer. What are some other whitewashed history stories that you can recall? So if anyone has any that they can think of, I would love to hear.
Go ahead and raise your virtual hand. Trish, go ahead and unmute.
I would say one of the ones that really has amazed me is, as a child, I thought, maybe there were one or two tribes of, maximum 50 people that were out there. And so what did it really matter that, we took the land? I mean, after all, we were superior in terms of, making use of the land and, making money from the land, et cetera. But that notion that, we really didn't do anything all that bad. It's not like we chased people away. It's not like we really killed a lot of people, maybe a little, but I mean, it's horrific what I'm saying, but I'll stop.
Thank you for sharing that, Trish.
I have another one. Is that okay, Eve?
Yeah.
Okay, Maggie, go ahead and unmute.
We went on a Rhodes Scholar trip to Alaska and were told of the Japanese invasion of the U.S. And on the Aleutian Islands, and that the U.S. government moved all the people off the island to old canneries where they died. 70% of them died from bad health conditions and no food and cold weather and everything. And nobody knows about that. So there's only one video about it, but nobody knows what we did to the Aleuts for World War II.
Thank you for sharing that, Maggie. I didn't even know that, so that's new to me too. I'll definitely have to do some digging.
Have a couple more. Is that okay,
Yeah.
Eve?
Yeah.
Okay, Mary Pat?
Well, almost all of our domestic history is whitewashed, I would say, but to be more specific, well, with respect to slavery, of course, there's this whole notion that's perpetrated about the happy slave, and they were well taken care of, and they sat around singing all day, strumming their banjos. But even more specific to Native Americans, I grew up in Tennessee, which, alas, is the home of Andrew Jackson. And who of course was instrumental in slaughtering a great deal of Native Americans, waging war on them and resettling, so to speak. And certainly as a child, we were taught to respect, we learned all the quote unquote good things about Andrew Jackson, who was of course a president of the United States. We didn't learn any of the bad things. And it was really only many years later, I guess, after I was in college and driving through the Smoky Mountains, and where I really learned about the Trail of Tears and all the number of Cherokee and no doubt others who were forcibly moved out of Tennessee and Kentucky into Oklahoma. So it's all whitewashed. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
And Coco, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I am a member of Urban Tour Group in Portland, where we give historical walking tours of downtown. I'm the only one that, of course, focuses on any Indian history. There is a mural in Jake's Crawfish that everyone should go into the hotel and look and see the mural on the side of the old lobby of the hotel, just for fun. But let's back up. When the first white people came to Portland, there were 100,000 Indians living in Willamette Valley or more. I mean, and how many languages just in that area? And Eve, you can correct me. I think in the Pueblos alone, there were 250 languages. I mean, you don't all speak the same language with each Pueblo. And I don't think a lot of Americans know that or think about so many languages. And I do agree, you know, jumping ahead now to something else, I do agree with someone that mentioned we need to re-educate and tell the real stories. And I'd like the natives to write the stories and not a white man. And start in kindergarten. I'm embarrassed as a white person for Thanksgiving. It's sad the way it's presented. You know, I know it's supposed to be cute and fun with Snoopy, but that's not how we should show it to the kids.
Exactly.
And the museum in Phoenix is the Herd Museum.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Coco. I definitely agree. I think, you know, this whole notion of like presenting Thanksgiving in like a, not even Thanksgiving, like, I mean, we're talking about Thanksgiving in this, you know, talk, but like all other, you know, whitewashed history stories, like really harmful stories that, you know, of interactions between white people with other, you know, marginalized group, the way that's been presented in, you know, this kind of tangible, like soft notion. I really disagree with that, because if if, you know, Black and brown children, you know, can grow up with the racism that has been, you know, in this country, that they've been grown up to, you know, been taught to behave a certain way in order to be, you know, more palatable to white people, more, you know, present themselves in a more distinguished way, then certainly white children can grow up knowing this real truth, because it's not fair to Black or brown children to grow up having to know all of this at the age of 5 and, you know, see themselves in that way, when white children can grow up with the comfort and, you know, the leisure that they get. So I definitely agree that it should start at a young age.
And as an Oregonian in the Northwest, are you all aware there's not an Indian museum in Seattle or Portland or San Francisco or LA or San Diego? We have nothing on the West Coast. No museum. And I was on Alcatraz in 1968, and would have loved to have had a museum. That's all we're asking. And I think the Historical Society in downtown Portland needs a new wing. It needs to revamp how things are presented.
I definitely agree. Thank you for sharing, Coco. I really appreciate that.
So we have more people, Eve, but I'm thinking you might want to move on.
I think for the sake of time, we'll unfortunately
because it is 8 o'clock now. So those folks who have their hands raised, if you might want to put your comments in the chat, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'll read all of them, so don't worry. Definitely, yeah, just put them in the chat. So moving forward, I think it's really important to talk about the history after the time period of Thanksgiving, because this is also like deeply tied in with that whole presented truth. And you know, this history is not really as focused on as the history of Thanksgiving, but it is equally as important. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Metacomet and King Philip's War. So Metacomet was Chief Massasoit's son, and he assumed the leadership of the Wampanoag after his father died. But Metacomet had a very different stance on colonial presence than his father did. Metacomet believes that the colonist presence violated indigenous sovereignty, that trading with them and relying on them for goods made them weak and, you know, violated the autonomy of indigenous people. And this mindset, you know, that Metacomet possessed made the colonists fear him because they were worried that he would incite, you know, a native or an Indian, oops, sorry, I scrolled too fast. That he would incite like an Indian uprising, which was something that they didn't want. So the colonists made him sign a peace treaty, quote unquote peace treaty, in which they had him hand over all the guns given to the Wampanoag by the colonists and hand them back over to the colonists. And this was done in order to prevent any uprising. So in doing this, tensions continue to rise. The fear that the colonists had against Metacomet and Metacomet's ideals, you know, continued to have these tensions. Metacomet was more commonly referred to as King Philip by the colonists. And eventually fighting broke out when 3 Wampanoags were executed by the colonists for killing a tribal informant who the Wampanoag had deemed a traitor. So this kind of set off King Philip's War. So Metacomet decided to form an alliance with the surrounding tribes in the area in order to force the colonists out. And this is actually one of the very first like revolutions of Native people in America. The one that I know not better, but I'm more familiar with growing up was the Pueblo Revolt, in which the 19 Pueblos of New Mexico forced the Spanish out and down into El Paso, Texas. So in this case, Metacomet formed an alliance with the Narragansett, Abenaki, Mohawk, Nipmuc, and the rest of the Wampanoag. And together, all of them began to fight the colonists and try and force them out. This fighting was extremely bitter, and many casualties were suffered by Native people. But eventually, the exhaustion of resources and starvation caused these alliances to crumble after some time. Excuse me. And when Metacomet realized that he was losing the war, he returned back to his ancestral land, where he was shot by a man named John Alderman. Excuse me. Who was a tribal informant working for Captain Benjamin Church, who was leading a hunting party that was chasing Metacomet. So after Metacomet was killed, his body was dismembered, his head was cut off and placed on a spike at the front, at the mouth of the Plymouth colony, which is about right here. Where it remained for the next 2 decades, a little over 2 decades. The rest of his body was quartered and hung on trees in the surrounding area for the birds to pick at. And his right hand was cut off and given, placed in a jar of rum and given to John Alderman. And Alderman would charge people a fee to look at it. In addition, Metacomet's head was sold to Plymouth Colony for 30 shillings, which was the going rate at the time for an Indian head. So in this time period, Indian people were routinely being executed as a bounty. So we were being hunted and our heads were being severed in order to collect this 30 shilling bounty, which is ridiculous. Metacomet's wife and children were taken and sold into slavery in Bermuda. So a question that I have for us to think about is, what was the message that was trying to be conveyed by these actions? What was their intended goal? And how were they successful? How would we define success in this context? Why is this brutal killing? Why did they do this? Why were they so brutal? Why was this brutality taking place? What does that show about the colonists, and how does that, what is their goal? Were they successful? So if we could maybe just get, 1 or 2 folks to raise their hand and, answer what they think about this, that would be great. Or type in the chat too.
Sarah Meyer, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Unhappy or sad or disgusted person, I would look at all of the inhumane wars that we inflict on people who are not like us. And then even if they are like us, they're like in different tribes. And I look at how people in the Mideast now and how they are supplied by us sometimes with, in current times. And it's just how man is such a insecure being blows my mind. I'll quit, but it's been going on for so long, and it was with our Native Americans. It was with our blacks that came in. It was with the Spanish that came in. It was with the Puritans that were pushed out of Europe. It was with the Jewish people that couldn't stay in their homes. It was with the Hutus and the Hintus. We're nasty, and I don't know what is in our genes that makes us nasty, whether we are native or not. That's it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh,
Elena.
sorry. Elena again?
If you read about Geronimo, and he was eventually imprisoned and died in prison, but after there were photographs and after he wrote a autobiography, but they just kept killing his family over and over and over again. And then eventually he and his group were doing retribution as well as trying to stay alive and save their tribe. So just you do this stuff and it comes back at you, and it's like, well, where did that come from? We only killed 4 of his wives serially. It's like, why is he so angry with us? I don't know. What could it be?
Thank you, Elena. I appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely, in this, to me, it shows to me how deeply evil these people were to me in my, viewing of them. I understand that like this has, our different viewings of them, that the way in which we view them is different. But to me, this story and other stories just show to me the evil that is possessed by, these folks, and how that evil has been transferred through the years in the same way in which generational trauma has been passed down, from Black folks and from Indigenous folks. I think in the same way we see this evil being presented today in the ignoring of issues happening within the Black community or the Native community. And for me, were they successful in, their goal? I think so, yeah, because white people are here today. And that is, the sign and symbol of colonial presence. And that does show that colonization was successful. So thank you both of you for sharing. And then if everyone in the chat could just share how this presented truth places you in it. And after knowing the history, how do you view your own position of Thanksgiving? So take some time to do that. And I'll continue on, but I'll read them. So knowing this, we can see why white people have decided to cover it up, and why I say no thanks. It's because of this harm that has happened that white people have decided to cover it up because they don't want to recognize what they've done. They've made the decision, the conscious decision to neglect the harm that's been done. And this story, this retelling, allows white people to forget the ways in which they've disassociated Native people through colonization. And it also allows them to forget and disassociate from the harm that they've done, because I think another reason why this story has been so whitewashed and so revised, it's because white people, can't comprehend or come to truth, with this actual truth, because it's so jarring and it's uncomfortable. And so, like with workshops like this, I want it to be uncomfortable because it's through then that we can grow. Through this story, we can see how it works as a monument of colonization, because this solidification of the story, this retelling of the lie every year, and commodification solidifies it as a monument, and it stands as colonization. And it's up to white people to amend these wrongs. It's not on the labor of any Black or Native people to fix the harm that has been done to our respective communities. It's up to white folks. So I have some questions here. Normally, with the smaller group size, we could get through all of them. But I think for this sake, maybe I'll just do. I'll just have folks type in the chat, but I'll only ask one and do the share question. But I'll send this slide and some other slides out to the attendees, so that way everyone in their own time can kind of look at these questions and think to themselves and answer them to themselves. And continue to. That's part of this, sharing of information after that, after the presentation, and putting the work outside of this presentation. So if everyone could just share one takeaway that you got from this presented truth in the chat, that would be great. And then if one or two people want to answer the first question, how does lack of representation / false representation continue to be detrimental to Native communities? Thinking about, how do Native children grow up viewing themselves and their relationship to the United States? So if anyone wants to raise their hand, maybe two folks or, could share, that would be great.
Okay, Trish.
Well, I guess one of the things, and I've sort of said this in the chat, what really profoundly distresses me, and this is kind of a takeaway, but it also relates to the representation issue. We've done this for economic reasons. We've done this out of this, economic model of capitalism as our holy grail, and that doesn't matter what we stamp on or take away or do. It's it's not just consumer goods. I mean, that might be the pinnacle of it all, but this has been done and continues to be done for economic reasons, to keep people down. So you talk about lack of representation. I mean, if you can't even have a voice that's respected, that's met with truth, no, I do think that, Eve, what you are doing in speaking the truth, and I see so many of us who've responded here to this and also our anti-racism series, I think who've really begun to embark on a journey of information, getting information, also deepening self-knowledge, really examining in the quiet what all this means. I don't think I have any of the answers, but I'll just return to that economics. We did this for money, guys. Anyway, it just, it pains me. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Trish. Maybe if one more person wants to share, or if one more person wants to answer.
Okay, Margot, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, but we have to think back that the Puritans were not doing this for money. They were doing it because they believed, it's because what they believed in, and they believed that they were better than others. So I think it had to do a lot with white supremacy, because they were doing it for their religious beliefs. So I think it has to do a lot with thinking that we're better than the others, and we know what's right, and everything has to be to our benefit. And it's not just us. This is happening all over the world. So we have to realize that this is part of it has to do with part of being a lot of people being human and what they do. Because a lot of the wars and things that are going on right now in the Middle East are not really about economics. They're really about control, and because they think that they're better and that the world should kowtow to them.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Margot. That made me, that makes me think of Manifest Destiny, that entire premise that this was the God-given right for white people to come and colonize this land. I wish I had included that famous painting of the white lady walking through America. And as she's coming, she's bringing light. And in front of her is all of this darkness. How does that imagery play into that whole, notion? I think that's really important, understanding what that does. Thank you. So I'll share this slide out. That way we can all have some time to just sit within our own time and think about these questions. Yeah, thank you. So we can see, all of these detrimental, effects and issues and how they surface as problems today. So currently the Mashpee Wampanoag are fighting the federal government to retain their land. In 2015, they were officially recognized as a tribe, which is ridiculous because, the Mashpee Wampanoag have been around longer than the federal government has been around. So you can kind of see how that's ridiculous and dumb. And currently the Trump administration is trying to seize 321 acres of their homeland, which would be extremely detrimental because already Native people are confined to reservations, which reduce the size of land that we're able to occupy. So taking 321 acres away would be really detrimental. Oops, I'm sorry, there's a siren outside. I don't know if you can hear. And in addition, Native folks all over North America are currently fighting off oil, gas, and renewable energy and other company encroachments on their land. I think, we tend to forget a lot about how renewable energy is still occupying Native land, even though it's better for the environment. We have to weigh, what that does to Native folks and how often Indigenous people aren't asked permission for these, windmills or solar panels to be built on their land. Same with oil and gas. And colonization is still ongoing. The wide existence across America is evidence of this. And, in learning this information, we can begin to, understand how to combat, these issues and how to become aware of our positionality, and what we can do. So before I end my presentation, to close it up, I kind of want to do a call to action. This amending of wrongs and, learning isn't up to Black or Native folks to, tell others what to do. It's more about taking the time to actually, read and educate yourself and listen to Black and Native folks who want to share. So my first point that I would make would be to listen to Black and Native folks to voice how they feel, their concerns, and what they want white folks to do. Action doesn't mean anything if you don't take the time to listen to what the actual needs are. So you don't want to show up in some community with, a nonprofit without asking what the actual need is there first. Secondly, I would say to redistribute your wealth. Privilege as a white person has allowed folks hundreds of more opportunities than Black or Native folks have ever been given. For every step white people take, Black and Native folks have to take 50 to get there. And that's because of the continuous disenfranchisement and other things. Even though capitalism isn't the solution because it perpetuates racism and runs off of racism, under the functions of while it exists, you should work to, one, abolish capitalism, and two, to funnel your money directly to Black and Native folks. So finding, mutual aid groups offering time and then other things are a great way to funnel your money directly to folks of these respective communities. And that works to combat racism and this continuous disenfranchisement. And thirdly, I would say to abolish the governmental system, the US governmental system, because the only correct way of governance is Indigenous sovereignty. Indigenous people know how to work the land, how to take care of it, and rule it. I don't want to say, rule, but, we know how to have those respectful, relationships. The US governmental system was never created with the welfare of Black or Native folks in mind, and it only serves the ones who it was, created for, which is white people. We have to think outside of the common response of calling our representative or canvassing for a certain candidate, because working within the system only prolongs its existence. So I think the best way to learn how to combat this is to read. There's a lot of really great works out there. And in the next slide, I've included a little reading list. But the best way to learn how to dismantle the system is to educate yourself. So I've included just a small reading list here of some books that I think are really informational. I've read a good portion of these, and some of these were recommended by my friends who are fellow of racial equity, teachers, scholars. So really do take the time to read some of this stuff. I think a lot of vital information can be learned from these books. I'll be sending this slide out to everyone. Yeah. And so this is the end of my presentation. Tawae, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today and work through this information and learn. I know that a lot of it was probably uncomfortable, but that discomfort just means, that we're learning and growing from this. And with this discomfort, can come something really beautiful, a different world, a different society. And that's what I want all of us to have. So, before I close it up, I just want to read this small little blurb that I think is really a good way to close it up. So we want to die of natural causes and hold our loved ones knowing that the heteropatriarchy has lost its own war against itself. We want to create on our own terms, in bodies of our own choosing. We want to restore our relationship with the cosmos and earth and move beyond the concept of Western truth. We want to be fearless. We want decolonization. We want to exist, never having to comprehend the need to defend ourselves, to worship only the earth. Tawae, thank you so much. And yeah, here's my contact info.
Well, Eve Dawae, to you. This has been a most fascinating presentation, and I've just been thrilled to see the comments. I mean, I can just feel the motors running in the brain, and I think we all will be inspired to take a look at that book list and hopefully share it with everyone. So Dawae.
Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing now. And I'll send this last slide out and the other one so everyone has my contact info and other things. But thank you all so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Any other questions do we have for Eve or for going forward? Go ahead and unmute yourself at this time. Margot?
Yes, when you said at the end, getting rid of the governmental something, were you referring to the fact that the tribes don't actually own their own land, even though it is their tribal land, that they're really under the auspices of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and that you want to get rid of that oversight and to be able to own your land just like private people do without governmental oversight? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm touching on. Reservations are, designated by the federal government.
Right.
Though we don't have the autonomy to rule our land, and our land consists of all of, North America. So the federal government, has the power over all of North America. So, working to get rid of that system into a system that honors Native folks here and, Black folks here is one that really fosters a space and society of care and love. And I know that it can kind of sound crazy, getting rid of that, even because that's something that we've grown up with, all of us, and that's what we're used to. But it can happen, and it's not a bad thing. I think that getting rid of that way of governance is something that can bring us forward to a better society and a better future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eve.
Thank you so much, Eve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Probably going to cry now.
So,
thank you all. Really great participation.
I don't think the answer land exchange was something I expected to come away with. Well, it was an exchange, really. Don't kill me. I'll give you my land. Only I'll give you 50 acres, and the fact that you took the whole continent is irrelevant.
I was going to say one of the things that I found is, it's easy more or less for us to become informed about these issues. Actually, that's not an easy process, but if done with integrity. But once it seems like we have to give up something or to change something or really change our perspective, if not our pocketbooks, I think so many times there's just this, nope, that's where it stops. When we have our next adventure in this series, when we're, I think, talking among branches and among members about what all this means, I think it's that lurch. It's all so great to talk about this and, oh, this is interesting and, oh, this is terrible. But, does this mean we have to give up land? Does this mean we have to redistribute money? Do we have to pay reparations? There are all sorts of aspects. I'm just focusing on the financial, but what if you live in a house that people are demonstrating against night after night, even if it's totally legitimate? Anyway, it's our challenge, and I think it's awesome that so many of you are seriously undertaking to understand and do. I really do. So kudos. I am going to wave off goodbye.
And are we all?
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks
coming.
again,
Thank
Eve.
you, Eve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.